Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We had an executive session prior to this meeting, and we're going to go off the agenda a little bit, and we're going to have the proposal for Thomas Kennedy Park first, just because we don't want to bore you with the consent agenda material. So if you please come up, we'd love to have you.
This body that it seemed like a good project. We sat down and we worked through more details. Toby put together some renderings and we kind of defined what the scope of the project is. We sat down and tried to work out what they could fundraise for and what they could provide versus what the city and city staff could provide. So the proposal that I put in the memo is the outcome of that meeting. That would be kind of a two-stage support by the city for the project. The first is some of what we talked about last time, a $5,000 donation towards the maquette, the preparation of the maquette, which they could then use to fundraise from. And then also for us to do the engineering and design of the foundations for under the granite seats and under the sculpture itself. Then the next phase would be the actual construction, which is about a $330,000 project. This is a significant undertaking that we're all embarking on here. And what I offered to them that we could help them with would be the construction of the concrete foundations, the removal of the trees, some landscaping, electrical irrigation, building the sidewalk back to the library, a total value of about $30,000. And then the group would fundraise to come up with the rest of the money for the project. If you agree on that, what we would like for you to do, it would be to pass a resolution of intent so that they know that the city is with them on this, and then they can fundraise, they can get letters of support from us to move forward with their fundraising activities and try to make this all happen next year, if possible. So this is the proposal that we have for you, and we just like your feedback, and any questions you have, they're all here to help.
Council?
I would like to have a whole lot more projects where we spend $30,000 and get $330,000 worth of park.
Good point.
What's the necessity for removing the existing tree?
Well, it's not a high-quality tree, although it does make up a significant. I mean, it's significant.
Not like that beautiful weeping willow that was at the park.
I don't know of a beautiful one, but I know one that was falling down. Anyhow, this tree does have a lot of high roots. Assuming over time, if we put this monument there, it could damage the benches, lift the pavers, do those kind of things. And what we would propose is that tree would be removed and we replace it with more trees of a better quality.
That's the only question?
What's that?
That's your only question?
Yeah, I mean, I've been to the site. That tree was a marked improvement on the property. And I didn't see anywhere where the condition of the tree was of a nature that would warrant its removal.
Well, I think it's a Norway maple, which is a high-quality tree.
Don?
I like it. I think Lou put his finger on a very important point. We get a lot of return for our investment.
So we're good to go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have it on the agenda next week to vote.
Tom, do you want to say something? I know you do.
No, it's okay. Thank you, Lou. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
Appreciate it. You got 20 minutes. Yeah. Thank you. I agree with this, however, it is trying to look much
Oh, yeah. I look at it probably once or twice a week.
It was the invisible tree.
We'll see.
It was invisible until we tore down the homes, then it was beautiful.
Okay, we're gonna go through the consent agenda.
Looks like a nice small meeting next week.
As usual, stop me if you have a question. All right, we start at 12:30 next week, goal-setting work session down in the Department of Community Economic Development Conference Room. Then we have a 6:30 PM executive session, or at least we'll have a vote to go in executive session at 6:30 PM. We'll talk about 1605 contract. Then a 7 o'clock regular session, and the invocation will be given by Councilman Quarterman, the pledge of the flag, the announcements. The meeting schedule is for September. There's no meeting on September 5th. The 12th and 19th are work sessions at 4 PM, and the 26th is a regular session at 7 PM. We'll have highlight Hagerstown Awards, citizen comments, a public hearing, land management code amendment, that's the auto repair and abandonment of simplified plats, city administrator comments, mayor and council comments, then we'll adopt the minutes of July 11th, 18th, and 25th, and then the consent agenda, start off with A, the community economic development, we have a container law exemption application permit for Hagerstown Hope Visibility on September 9th, 2017. B, information technology and sports services, renewal of ISRI GIS software support. ESRI Redlands, California for $35,000. And utilities, wastewater, John Deere excavator, Jesco out of Baltimore, Maryland for $95,033.40. Wastewater, a 12-ton cam trailer from Jesco, Baltimore, Maryland for $12,050. Wastewater, submersible grinder pump, Fluid Solutions Incorporated, Westminster, Maryland, $47,440. Wastewater spending a lot of money. Wastewater, SCADA upgrades and modifications, Optimum Controls Corporation, Reading, PA for $30,000. And under wastewater, preliminary engineering work for bypass at the Fluent Chamber, GHD out of Bowie, Maryland, not to exceed $18,000. Any questions on any of that? There'll be no unfinished business. That's good to know. Under new business, introduction of an ordinance, land management code amendment for auto repair. Introduction of an ordinance, land management code amendment, abandonment of simplified plats. One of those could be
We have an addition,
the, community rescue, right?
rescue mission, quick lane.
Right. Rescue
It's
mission,
ready.
rescue mission, quick claim, sorry. Approval of resolution, Thomas Kennedy Park. The approval of an agreement, the Hagerstown Ice Amateur Athletic Association to use the inline rink at Fairgrounds Park.
Mr. Mayor, just out of curiosity, do we have any idea when the rink is going, is it completed yet by the Caps?
The boards called the dasher boards are completely re-lined, or re-skinned, I guess you'd say. The court is finished. The only thing it is not finished is the scoreboard. And we're just waiting on their contractor to, as they go from these different rinks, he's coming here to put the scoreboard.
Okay, are we going to hopefully maybe have some type of grand opening appreciation for the Capitals? Okay,
Yeah, I emailed them and asked them that and wait on their response.
that's fine, I just want to make sure that we
Yeah.
do something
Yep.
appropriate, that's great, thank
Okay.
you.
All right, approval of Maryland Department of Environment grant for energy water infrastructure programs at wastewater treatment plant. And the approval to proceed with an RFP for student housing, which we'll discuss here shortly. Any questions on the consent agenda? It's painless enough. All right, Jill, you're up. That was project number 3. Request for proposals for developer partner for USMH student housing.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Mark Halsey as the Executive Director of USMH, who's a partner on our first model project and here to support the second project as well. Kathy's handing out some short slides that we're going to go through as well. So we're here to talk about Catalyst Project number 3 in more detail and to present an RFP for primarily the administration of a community legacy grant to identify a developer partner for a student housing project, using the same concept that we used in December of 2014 when we issued a request for statements of interest and request for proposals to identify our first developer partner for student housing. The project became the Patterson. We selected a partner in March of 2015, and we had a tight window of construction to meet the start of the school year, so we had until August of 15, and I'm going to run you through some slides here to show you, these are before pictures of the Patterson property, which was a 19-room boarding house converted into 4 two-bedroom, 2-bath apartments supporting 8 students from USMH. So we're really proud of this project, also its operation over the last 2 years. In terms of occupancy, there is a rent guarantee component of this project, and we've had minimal expense because of strong occupancy in the last year, nearly 100% occupancy on these apartments.
So it's 4 apartments for 8 students.
For 8 students, configured in 2-bedroom, 2-bath. So just wanted to give you a quick visual on that. I'm going to give you a quick overview on how the partnership works, and then Kathy's going to run through some of the mechanics of the RFP. We'd also like Mark to talk a little bit about the demand for student housing based on the growth of university programs. So essentially, it's a 3-way partnership between the city, a developer, and USMH. USMH provides the names of students who have needs for housing to the developer partner. The city provides an incentive package, which includes, in our recommendation for the second model project, a community legacy grant of $200,000, and also the ability of the developer to apply for the existing city's Partners in Economic Progress program, which offers additional benefits. We could award the community legacy grant to a single project. We left flexibility in the RFP to potentially award it to multiple projects based on scale. So there is some flexibility written into this, so it could either be a single project or multiple projects. The city and USMH provide a rent guarantee. So the way that works, that if during the period of time selected, if the developer is unable to lease the space or collect rent from the students, that the city and the USMH would each provide 100% guarantee, 50% by the city and 50% by USMH, to make the developer whole during the agreement period. We're looking to select a developer through this process by January, and we're looking for delivery of the units for March of 19, which would allow students to look at them in preparation for the August timeframe of the start of school for August of 19. So an initial set of apartments in March of 19, another set of apartments in March of 2020. So I'll turn it over to Kathy to run through some of the key components of the RFP.
Okay. We're planning to use the same format as last time, only with a few tweaks based on lessons learned from the first process. First, I'll go through what's pretty much the same and then what the changes we proposed. This time, again, we'll be doing an RFP to interested developers, property owners in the downtown area. Experience and financial capacity is part of the review process as we review these submittals. The building has to be renovated to the Partners in Economic Progress Program standards. We've clarified that sprinklers are required if they're not already in the building. The security feature requirement continues on from the prior process where you need to have exterior door locks, lighting, cameras, intercom systems in the units, and then an exterior door release system from the units. What's clarified in this RFP is that the ground floor security intercom system must be on the exterior of the building rather than inside the vestibule, because that led to some issues. Meant that the outside door was not locked. What's changed with the RFP is we're proposing a one-step process rather than two-step. Last time, people submitted a statement of interest, and then we were supposed to review it and maybe weed people out, and we realized at the time that was completely untenable. No one was going to be satisfied with staff weeding people out, so this time it's just one step. You submit your proposal, we review it, and make a recommendation to the mayor and council. And then last time, we were only looking for proposals for buildings within a priority area within a short distance from the university. Now we're saying opening it up to the entire CCMU zoning district, but still saying, although there's a priority for this certain designated area, and that's on the map. The blue outline is the CCMU zoning district. The red cross area in the middle is the priority area, which is basically what the priority area was last time. But this time we're opening up to little other areas because with now the Walnut Street Clinic in play, so there could be some other areas near to the clinic that might be of benefit.
You don't have a map.
You don't have a map. I'm so sorry. You can have my map.
She's in that.
Here's your map. Let's see. A mix of units is okay. Last time we said they had to be 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom. Now we're saying a mixture of unit types is okay, but the preference is for efficiencies and 1-bedroom units. That makes it a lot easier to lease up rather than having to find pairs of people willing to live together. So that's a change. We're looking at least 5 units per year for 2 years instead of 8 student units with a rent guarantee for 5 years. So we're saying 5 student units is what the anticipated demand would be for the first year of the physician's assistance program. And then for the second year, anticipating there might be a need again for another 5 student units. These are conservative estimates based on the number of students they're projecting will be in the program. Off-street parking would be required if you are not, your building is not in the priority area, assuming at that point you're going to be rather far from public parking facilities. So if you've got a building outside that area, then you should be able to provide off-street parking behind your building in the alley or however it might be situated. An additional consideration in the selection criteria is any proposing to acquire one of the city's properties through the CNS proposals process, basically the Roslyn Building, 170 West Washington Street, another incentive to get people to wanting to take those buildings from us. In terms of next steps in the timeline, we're looking to get hopefully a go-ahead this evening so that we can then put the RFP out in early September and then have it due back in early November. Staff and the USMH staff will review what we get in and we'll prepare a recommendation from the mayor and council that would be presented to you in December. And at that point, we'd be looking for authorization to proceed with negotiations of a partnership agreement. And we would do that over the next several weeks and then come back in January for approval of the partnership agreement. So that's kind of how we were proposing to lay it out in the process that we were proposing.
And I'd like Mark to talk a little bit about the housing demand. In this chart is what we use in our city center plan update, but Mark can run us through this and any new information.
At this point, the physician assistant program is planned for start in fall of 2019, roughly 2 years from now. The capacity for the program will be 30 students in each entering class. So it'll only be fall entering classes, not spring. So at the end of the 3rd year of enrollment, there'll actually be 90 students in the program before they begin to graduate. The first year, we will probably start with something less than full capacity, so we're thinking it'll be more like 22, 23 students in that first year. Based on history in other parts of the country, we can anticipate over time about 50% of the students will be from out of the a driving radius, and about 50% will be within a driving radius. That may be a little more local students the first year or two just because of pent-up demand, but over time, that's what we're expecting. The student housing would not have to be for these students. We're simply expecting that this is going to be a decided and predictable influx of students from the outside that will be looking for housing. If we can, let's presume that we have 45 students in 3 years that are all from the outside. If we can, we want all 45 students within 2 blocks of our front door. That's the intent, is to get walking traffic in downtown Hagerstown. And hence, because those courses will be offered at Walnut Street, that's why we're kind of moving. On the first project, we said 2 city blocks from the front door, our front door. But now with people needing to walk to Walnut Street, that's why we're kind of pushing that envelope a little further in that direction.
And we'd be happy to answer any questions, and looking for a nod tonight, bringing this back next week as a motion in order to allow us to issue the RFP in September.
A couple. One, especially with regards to you talking about Walnut Street, the mayor, in the last administration, our current mayor was a little critical of us not taking advantage of this to fill the Holiday Hotel up, right, Mayor? And so I'm just wondering, and when I hear Walnut Street, is that building a building that would be amenable, if any of you know, to rehab that would be suitable for student housing?
Kathy mentioned 170 West Washington.
Is that 170? Okay, okay.
170, certainly.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm getting names and addresses mixed up. And I would certainly think that we would want to give an incentive to
You think?
properties such as that, yeah, and look at this thing and making sure that people know that they're going to have trouble competing against a proposal that uses that building.
Right, that we mention in here, additional consideration in the ranking criteria if a proposal comes in that also proposes to acquire a city-owned building. Because we want to see those buildings moved back to the private sector.
I think it's a superb idea, talking about turning lemons into lemonades. The only other thing I will ask is, I know I get a little senile and behind the times. I did not think we had funding for the PEP program in this year's budget. Is that right or wrong?
That's incorrect. We do have.
We do have it funded.
level funding.
As I said,
Yes.
senility is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, we were able to save some of our incentives, just not all of them.
I'm all for it.
Anybody else? You're all for it? You're all for it? You're all for it? I
Come
can't
back
hear
to
you. Can
next
you
week.
speak?
Speak up, Emily. Sounds
We, Mark, Jill, Kathy, me, city administrator, and our liaison to DHCD need to have a meeting prior to September, the second week of September anyway. We're gonna have a visit by Secretary Holt, who is very excited about student housing in Hagerstown, so. But we have to have a meeting prior to that so that we can get our ducks in a row when we meet with him. So,
I think that one of the things that we heard, I don't know, it was maybe 2 or 3 legislative sessions ago, one of the individuals that came and spoke to us spoke about the University of Maryland system and about the change in attendees of college and how attendees, go to college and how that's, going to continue to change over time as states and state university systems look to facilitate, bringing college to the person rather than the person to the college. I found it interesting that it hasn't changed the tenacity with which individuals want to attend those state university systems. And one of the most telling numbers for me at that time, and I could be wrong, but I thought that what he said was at that one particular year, there were like 28,000 applications for University of Maryland College Park, and only 5,000 individuals got the letter of, yes, you've been accepted.
Something
And-
like that.
And just that number was so astounding to me to hear, it was that, that many more. And I'm sure there, half of those are kids that apply at a number of different places. But I bet at least half of them said, this is the place I want to go. And even at half, they still have less than half the spots available to actually be at that location, so.
And that is a statement about our university in Maryland. Of course, when I graduated there, I wish I could say that, you had the same difficulty getting in than I did when I got in. But it's, you gotta be like a Harvard student to get into Maryland.
The other peculiarity of what's going on broadly in the United States, but specifically in Maryland, the people who are graduating from four-year institutions, that are public institutions in Maryland, only about 50% of them started at that institution 4 years prior. Looking at the other way, while we have some people that are transferring from one four-year institution to another, the vast majority of the statistics are people, almost half of the people graduating with a four-year degree now are going to community college for 2 years before going to a four-year institution.
Yeah.
Speaks well to our community college system in Maryland.
Yeah.
Yes.
You all have done a wonderful job.
We're trying.
Imagine downtown without university and without barbering room, it's been really positive.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right,
Now, on a more depressing note.
Jill and Warren, we'll talk about Blues Festival.
Man, I have no idea.
I think Eric and Jim are going to join us. So on a positive note, we can't have a conversation about Blues Fest without recognizing the commitment and dedication of Carl Disk and Julie Donat as the Carl as the founder and the chair, Julie as a longtime volunteer and co-chair of the event. So we really want to recognize their longevity and their commitment to the community through this event. We want to recognize the support of event sponsors, and there's countless of hours of volunteer work that goes in to make this event happen. So truly, I think it's an amazing event in terms of volunteers and community partners. We have a range of factors and rationale for recommending some significant changes to the 2018 event. Just to summarize, some of those factors are leadership and staff changes, loss of major sponsors, demands of the urban improvement project, and what we anticipate as significant other community fundraising efforts that will take place in the community. There's also, on a positive side, a desire for us to use the Cultural Arts Trail as a future venue for the festival, and we need time to think how that would be configured. And not insignificant is, we have a new event in July of next year, the USA Cycling Championships. So that will take place in a relative time frame in a very heavy events summer for 2018. To talk a little briefly on staff changes, Lauren has done a fabulous job as a lead staff member for us for the Blues Fest and for countless other events. We want to congratulate Lauren. She's shifting into a new position as our planning and outreach coordinator in our community development function area of our department. So that starts in September, phasing her in 50% in the new position and 50% with events. And come January, she will be 100% in that new position. When we went through the budget cycle, there is a requirement in the FY18 budget that any vacancies in departments stay open for a 4-month time frame as a cost savings. So we're factoring that into our rationale in terms of just the staff resources needed to put on a festival the size of Blues Fest. And truly want to congratulate Lauren on her new job. Foundational to our recommendation is that the budget, the event is budgeted to break even each year, and it's not performing. So Lauren's going to run us through some of the attachments in a minute. I want to share with you one additional point is a difference between Blues Fest and August-toberfest, because we get this question often. August-toberfest is a separate nonprofit organization, and they manage their events' financial performance outside of the city's budget. So whether August-toberfest is a net positive or a loss has no impact on the city budget.
Except for city services.
Except for the city services, which we anticipate each year at a flat level primarily. But differently, Blues Fest is a program event inside the city budget. It's several line items inside the Department of Community and Economic Development. So a financial loss with that event directly impacts the city budget. I think that, you know, we understand factors that Blues Fest is loved by the community, that it's been with us for more than 20 years. We understand its economic impact. And while we're talking about doing something different for 2018, this might be a challenging conversation. I also think it's a responsible conversation to have, specifically looking at the impact of the event on the city's budget. So we're providing 2 recommendations, both of which involve the change of taking a year off from the traditional large-scale event, primarily because we need time. We need time to rebalance the resources and the finances, personnel resources, as well as the finances that support the event. Our staff team came up with 2 options. One is simply take a year off and use the time to reconfigure a modified new event for 2019. We have interest on the Blues Fest committee of a number of people that would be willing to serve on a reconfiguration committee. Option 2 is essentially the same, but present a new smaller scale event on the same weekend in 2018. We outlined in the memo a recommendation of a Friday, Saturday event for downtown and having the economic impact for downtown, primarily using University Plaza. And we're not recommending using the central lot for a modified event, primarily because once you set up in the central lot, as a venue, you've already created a large-scale event in terms of setup, equipment, and logistics, just by using that site as a venue. I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to walk through the attachments to the memo, which provide more detail on the finances.
So I'm going to review the 2017 event performance and then go into a performance analysis of kind of the last 8 festivals that we've had for Blues Fest. But before I jump into that, I do just kind of want to comment briefly on the budgetary purpose of Blues Fest, and our goal is to have a break-even event, and taking into consideration that we do have 2 free public days of Blues Fest. But in fact, there really are no true free days for Blues Fest. We still have for-profit aspects at every day of Blues Fest, so there's truly no day that we're not receiving some kind of monetary benefit to Blues Fest in some form, whether by merchandise, beverage sales, alcohol sales, something to that effect. So we truly don't see any day where the city is absorbing all costs to the event. The performance for the 2017 event, as you can see in one of the charts in front of you, we're seeing that the budgetary revenue, which was at $225,300, fell short. We hit about $177,000. And the budget remained almost flat with only an increase of $228,000, so about a $3,500 increase in budget. We faced several different issues, I suppose you would say, in terms of expenses, in terms of lost corporate sponsorships this year, several in-kind donations that we then had to turn into monetary costs to an expense to the event itself, including increased costs to technical fees of sound reinforcement, which we had in a bid coming up last year. Moving forward potentially to future events, there are also 2 bids coming up for merchandise and tenting, which could also perform the same way, whereas we budget for about a $14,000 expense for both of those. Those could increase in the next 3-year cycle that we do issue a bid. So it's a consideration. Typically what we're seeing, the main issue is not necessarily expenses, while it is a consideration, is that revenue is falling short of what we're expecting, particularly in the gate area and also in just beer vendor sales and merchandise. Looking over the performance of the event over the last 8 events, you're seeing that that is a common thread, that there has been overall, the theme has been a decrease in overall expenses. There is a little bit of an outlier in this sheet, just so you're aware. Until 2012, we did include State Art Council and local Washington County Arts Council grants within our sponsorship. So while you are seeing $0 in 2010, 2011, those actually are, we did receive sponsorships in that, or I suppose grants in that year. We just wrote them under the sponsorship line item until a line item was created in 2012 to actually reflect that as a separate item. Also consideration is that we are not 100% sure in the actual consistency of the plotting to specific line items, so this is our best estimation as to how things were placed, but in the last couple years, we have been very sure to that everything that belongs in the correct line item is plotted to the correct line item, so that's something that we also had to factor into. But the main idea from this long-term revenue expense report is just that we're seeing throughout the years there's been a decrease. This isn't just came on in the last year. This has been a trend that's happening with the event, as well as revenues have not really hit that break-even point either. So it's just a trend that we're seeing that we'd like to reflect to you in just dealing with such a large budgetary item.
So I'd also ask if Jim or Eric have any additional comments, or Lauren, any other items?
Not really. I mean, I've been involved in Blues Fest for 17 years. My first one was in actually 2000, so I deal more on the logistics sides of things. But we certainly are trying to move forward in this event. In what you've seen in years past is going to be difficult with the obstacles that we're running into. So.
Yeah, I'd echo that, and I guess I'd also say that no matter what type of event, if an event is planned for 2018, no matter what size or scale, we almost have to start planning immediately for that. Certainly if it's as large an event as Blues Fest has been in the past, we would typically be starting the process to line up acts and talent and everything else now. So if, I guess going forward, if there is going to be an event in 2018, the sooner we know that, the sooner that we can start on that, the better.
Mr. Mayor, I think we have, as has been alluded to already, for the next 2 years coming up, national recognition with these amateur bike races that are coming. And they're coming in June, if I'm correct. Is that right?
End of July.
End of July. I think everybody needs a break. I think option 1 is appropriate, and I would like to see our time devoted to trying to be ready for a national event such as that, and give staff a break. It's the Blues Fest is a phenomenal thing. It's been since the beginning, but I think it's pretty obvious what's happening right now, and I think it'd do everybody good to give them a year to see what can be done with anything. But I think based upon our experience, we have to look towards a methodology of doing in the future that's akin to August-Toberfest versus what we've done as it being a city project.
I just have to say, I can hardly talk, so I apologize. I think this is extremely disappointing. I think the Blues Fest is the second biggest festival on the East Coast. It's what draws a lot of people to Hagerstown. And there's a lot of musicians in this area who are very enthusiastic about this. I think this is a blow to Hagerstown to not have a blues fest, whether it's for a year, for whatever. I'm curious if you've done a call for citizens or reached out to local musician groups in this area, because I can guarantee you there would be people willing to help. I can guarantee there would be people willing to help. People are very passionate about this event. I understand we've been losing money because the cost of things are going up. I mean, anytime you hold an event like this, it's going to get more costly each year. But I think canceling something like that, that each year puts Hagerstown on the map, is detrimental to the direction that we're trying to grow. This is one of the few times that everyone in our community, not everyone, but a lot of people come out, they celebrate, they have a good time. People know about the Blues Fest, they mark it on their calendar every year. I think that eliminating this is, I just think it's a horrible idea. And I understand having to regroup, but I think that if you did a call to our citizens, to the music community around here, that there would be people who would be willing to come in and help.
The problem is those people have to come to us. Just like Carl came to us and said, we have a fabulous idea. We're gonna do everything. We're gonna scout, we're gonna contract, we're gonna find, we're gonna get. What we need from you is this. And to look at our staff and say, go out and find people to do this, especially when it appears that the three most pivotal people in this whole thing that have kept this thing going for 22 years are now not involved anymore. And I won't even ask about the sponsors, but I also know when you lose those three people, by definition, you're gonna lose sponsorship because they're part of the reason we had it. And even in our best case scenario, we'd be talking about something really different. And that's my concern. We don't have anybody that I know of on staff that can do this. And this is kind of, for this kind of project, you've got to love it. You've got to want to do it so bad, because it is, if they start now for next year, it's like full-time right now.
And I may be wrong, but I think that there are people out there that would love it. And this is the first time a lot of us are hearing, this. I have a feeling if the Herald Mail printed tomorrow, there will be no more Blues Fest if people don't step up and help, that there might be a different song being sung then.
Let's hope.
Or,
Yeah, because I
and
think,
I may be wrong, but I doubt it.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I think that, it's 22 years, it's a long-term festival, and it has helped put Hagerstown on the map, absolutely, with that sort of music. But Councilman Metzger's also correct in that we do not have those resources. Staff does not have that skill set. We don't have the resources, and we don't have actual resources, monies to do it. So with that being said, I thought that, the idea of regrouping for a time, it's a 22-year festival. There's facts here that show that there's some reduction in what's happening with that festival, and I think it makes good sense to try to do that.
And
Now,
I
you're
think-
right. I mean, if someone comes forward,
Right. I think if Emily is correct and there people will come forward, I can tell you how it could be done. It would not be done under the same manner that we did last year, because I think it would be difficult to put that together if we started right now to try to do that.
Yeah, it would still be a revised or a
However,
modified.
if we go back to the beginnings of Blues Fest, I think the Friday night act was at HCC at their amphitheater, not their amphitheater, inside, the Kepler Theater. Kepler Theater was, they had on Friday, and I think Saturday, the headliner was at the Maryland Theater. And when they first started, they had one stage right on the square. So when the Blues Fest started, it certainly wasn't what it is today. And if you had the right people who wanted to do things, and it wouldn't even have to be a blues fest, it could be a music fest. So you could incorporate all types of music, and you could incorporate 100% of it being local musicians. I think Emily knows somebody who plays in a band that would love to play at some stage. So, you know, you could go from Blues Fest to Music Fest. You could have it a combination of City Park, at the band shell and other places, and at University Plaza. And it can be a 100% free thing, and we can have local talent. And that could be done. That could be done with people coming forward, as Emily says, and saying, hey, we don't want this to die. We'll do this.
I think that was the idea in the option two, and just because we said University Park, that was just one idea, but it was
Understood.
an idea that what we could do internal, you know, we feel that we have some funding that we could do that, we can use local bands, we could do 2 free days, but yet.
That's still gonna require
but it-
Emily's people to come forward and say, we will be responsible.
My fear would be to say, we're gonna do the Western Maryland Blues Fest again.
Right.
And sitting here right now, I don't believe that we can make that happen.
Right.
And then I feel that that would be more of a disappointment to move forward with saying we're doing this exact same thing, and then we look like we fail instead of going out on the high note that we did in the 22 years.
We did hear feedback during a meeting. We had the same conversation with the Blues
With the
Fest
committee.
committee in July. And we did hear concern from committee members and sponsors that trying to do something without the adequate planning time could create confusion and disappointment, specifically, not just to customers and patrons, but to the sponsors. So I'm all about when we do something, to do it with quality and to do it with advanced planning time to ensure quality.
Did we know in advance that Carl and Julie were stepping down?
No.
No.
But we knew in June.
We knew
After the event.
Right after the
yes.
event.
right,
No, right after the
because I was on that email. I didn't
Yeah,
know
I
that
know.
prior to that.
No.
So the only thing I could say is, are there any other Carl and Julies out there and other events that we have? Because we should make sure we don't put ourselves in this position again where if one person resigns or 2 people resign, that the show can't go on, whether it be Blues Fest or August Fest or anything. I'm using their names, but we need to figure out if there are any other Carl Julies out there that if they bow out, we're in a bad position.
Well, sure, you're gonna have that with August-Oktoberfest, if you lose, because that's what it is. These festivals are the love of individuals. They,
Absolutely, that's why they kept it alive for 22 years.
no, right,
They-
and that's the
They
problem.
deserve all the credit in the world,
I
but
mean, and
now,
where we had trouble getting volunteers to even come in and work, let alone take the responsibility of being in charge. That's the problem. And that's how both of these festivals have come about. One was Carl and one was Charlie Scola. And there's no question that when those players leave, there is a vacuum that not only takes out the leadership who's been putting it together, but that leadership has been responsible for sponsors being willing to say, okay, I know, I'm willing to put that money up because I know what I'm getting. And so you need somebody with that love who just really wants to do it.
And it doesn't mean that someone else couldn't come forward with
But it takes-
something different or a different music type or something or
Like,
with that
like this
passion.
Joe Boyd guy, he could come forward and put
That
together
would be,
something.
that would be
Recommendation in their
similar.
email.
That would be very
but
similar.
I
to
just mean
Blues,
in
which
any
would-
situation now, we should use this as a learning experience. If you retire tomorrow and you've done X, Y, and Z this whole time, there's no one behind you that knows what was going on, are we gonna be like, what's going on? We can't put ourselves in this position.
Well, we can control succession planning with staff. I can't control
Yeah.
succession planning with volunteers. I mean,
Yeah.
I made a little, I think maybe a few assumptions that others were kind of, you know, being groomed in an exact role, but that's not what happened on the side.
Michelle, what do we have budgeted in the budget for blues?
It's pretty much equal to the fiscal year 17 budget. We didn't really budget an increase for fiscal year.
Yeah, I think we kept the same.
Yeah. Here's my take, and I'm gonna let Kristen have this say, but here's my take. I believe we have to have some kind of festival next year, even if it's a scaled-down version, and as Lou points out, maybe it's a music festival and not just a blues festival. And maybe we have to use local talent, and we do those kind of things. Maybe we get one headliner. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. But here's the deal. We budget city services for Blues Fest. We budget city services for August-Toberfest. We budget city services for the Mummers Day Parade. We budget city services for all types of events, okay? So, yeah, are we gonna make money on city services? Of course not. I mean, that's why we budget
No,
for it.
we're not, right.
Okay? So to say that, you know, when you throw that number in here, especially on this sheet, it looks particularly hateful, because that bumps that number to $89,000, okay? All right, well, we budget city services for those events, and we use hotel motel tax money for that.
I can't say.
Usually,
Yeah.
usually, I mean, tourism dollars. So, we need, we need to take the city services part out, the expense. I mean, we're gonna have to have city services,
Well,
but you
that's kind of
can't.
what we were thinking of, a funding, that we would have a funding source to do something on a smaller scale, because the initial budget for Blues Fest is a wash, supposed to be. Okay, so let's assume it is a wash, and the revenues come in and we have the expenses. But we do have budgeted money, some $50-some thousand that we would be able to use to do something on a smaller scale. And that's what Jill and I were
Right.
looking at when we were
Right,
looking
and
at
that's
doing something.
great, that's all I'm
Yeah.
saying.
I have a
We,
suggestion.
we have that,
Yeah, and we could use that to do something like that.
we have that, and we can do
There, you
a
know,
hang on, Lou, I'm not done yet, but you'll get your turn again. We can do a smaller festival at a lesser cost per ticket, which I believe helps, because it was $45 this year for Saturday, right? Is that what it-
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Not everybody has $45, okay? But I think you'll get more attendance at a smaller festival if you're not charging $45. And people have the ability to meander around downtown and do those kind of things that we want to do. That we want to bring feet to the street of downtown. So,
so we have one group who does have this expertise. And it seems to me that the way you could turn this into a nice music festival, caught my attention when you use the word, get one good headliner. You know, we could work with the Maryland Theater for the appropriate date in the summer to see if they could obtain a headliner for a Saturday night concert that would be in conjunction with our local music people at the park on Sunday and University Plaza on Friday, so to speak, and try at the same time, because one of the things I saw in the memo is one of our problems is competition with a lot of major fundraising that's going to be going on at the same time, and one of the major fundraising places was the Maryland Theater. So why don't we try to work with the Maryland Theater to incorporate a music festival into fundraising for the Maryland Theater and see if we can get them to try to get the headliner. You know they're gonna wanna do fundraisers, and we could try to work with them between Barbara Ingram, the Hagerstown Municipal Band, and local bands, and see what we could do as far as a musical festival around here.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. And I think it's those sort of things that we just take a little bit of time and brainstorm. I like that idea.
I do too.
Yeah.
well, again, I have to agree with Emily that we need to have some sort of an event, so we don't lose that momentum that we've created over 22 years.
I'm not doing Blues Fest. That's the problem. And then how do you get that back?
Kristen, anything from you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on the issue, and, you know, mine are, I guess, more numbers oriented, and then relate back, you know, to the memo of sort of, you know, why we shouldn't do these things. And I'm just gonna tell you flat out that, you know, when we adopted the urban, the plan, one of the catalysts was we need to increase and accentuate upon the number of downtown-oriented events we have. And this is just my opinion, but I feel like over the last 2 years, and I just said it, the other day, and when we met with the Maryland Theater about Wind Down, sort of missed those for whatever reason this year. I just feel like, we're losing some of that momentum that we had when we adopted that plan and said that's going to be one of our priorities. We started sort of identifying opportunities to meet that priority. And there was sort of a push to do that, and now I feel like we're sort of falling a little bit, for whatever reason, in the opposite direction. And I think the worst thing we can do is head in the opposite direction. If we were to look at the swimming pool or any other sort of community amenity in the same manner that we're looking at this right now through this lens, we should shut those down as well. And when I look at the numbers and I read the memo and it says, lack of sponsorships, and I see 2010, $95,000, 2017, $90,000. Really, for me, one of the biggest areas and the most notable areas of decline is in admissions. And I think one of the worst things that has happened, and I don't want to offend anybody that's been associated with the Blues Fest, in probably, 15 years that I've been familiar with going or not going, is the admissions process, the cost for the average person to want to go. And so I guess when I look at this, I agree with Emily. I think that we shouldn't lose the Blues Fest. But I don't think that you look at it and say, okay, we lose 2 people, out of the committee. I mean, I'd want some type of letter from the committee saying, hey, as a committee, we're all folding and we're not interested, and we can't make this happen. If everything we do, is driven by, the loss of that limited level of participation, then we wouldn't have anything. And for me, I would rather us look at the figures as it applies to those things that have worked well, and those things that have generated some of that decline. And one of the things that Carl touched on in one of the emails was the notoriety, the national notoriety of the act. When I read some of this other stuff of, we're competing with Frederick having events, I mean, we can't do that. I mean, we have 50,000 people within this area to draw from, and if we say, we're not going to have this because Frederick's doing something or Chambersburg's doing something, I don't think that's any more positive than not having, not following that catalyst of projects. I've said it for a number of years. It's becoming cost prohibitive for the average person to attend. The average person to feel inclined, cost-wise, to want to attend. I think that's part of the issue with admissions. I think that having it in the central lot, I know Emily and I probably disagree on this, has not been as welcoming a venue as the openness of the origination when we had it, in the 2 streets, in which, these plaza areas and one of the options could present. And so all I'm saying, I guess, is we go back to the committee, we structure it in a manner that's, more manageable, more accessible, and more cost-effective, and recognize, those changes that have to be made to make it more accessible, to make it more affordable, to make it more manageable on both sides of that equation, and at least exhaust that opportunity, over the next 2 months to make that happen. I'm not a blues guy, so I don't, when I go, I don't know whether.
I don't know who they are.
Whether the third
Yeah, I'm
act
the same way.
was the most, notable within the blues community, or whether the ninth act was. All I know is there's an activity, an event happening in our core, that is desirable to attend, no differently than when Wind Down, expanded last year or the year before into, a sort of more open, accessible, and frankly, family-oriented, type of activity.
Has Joe Blue been reached out to?
Attempts to contact him have been made and they have not been returned.
I bet if Carl made a phone call, he'd get a phone call back. I just think that we don't poo-poo it all together.
Maybe one stage instead of two?
Yeah, I think there was, the first option was to do nothing, but I think staff was more on the line of doing something to at least hold that weekend, do something that weekend, and we can certainly go back to the committee and see, as, Kristen just mentioned, is there a way to structure it smaller, to do something? We could
I just think
certainly
there's got to be a way. You
willing to
have
do that.
22 years worth of event-oriented knowledge to be able to go back and evaluate sort of the 10 or 15 things that make this thing happen and say, okay.
Well, the key
I
things,
mean,
though,
what-
the key thing is the person who can produce it. Right now, we don't have that person. We may be able to find that person. We don't, no
We have
one
that
has that.
person's resume.
Yes, we do. So someone may come forward like that. And the other thing was sponsorship. If council was saying, put another $100,000 toward it, and we don't have to worry about getting 100,000 of sponsorships, that's different then. But right now, we're not sitting here like that. We're sitting here expecting that we have to get 100,000 in sponsorships, and we don't have someone to get sponsorships. And we have concerns about other events that are taking place in the community that will be drawing upon sponsorships. So those are the two key things, and if we can fix those two things, then I agree that it could go. But right now, sitting here right now, we don't have that.
Jim, you've been involved with this for a long time. What was the cost of admission 18 years ago?
$7.
At the beginning, I don't know, my first Blues Fest was 2002, and I don't really remember exactly what the cost was, but I know that it's sort of gone and say, you're
It was
probably
$7.
right. Yeah.
It was $5 the first year, and then it went up to $7, and then it exponentially climbed, as the notoriety of the acts were increased.
I mean, I remember it going from, at some point
But if you
later
look
on, it
at
went from
2010
25
numbers to
to
2017 numbers over that 7-year period, the cost for talent hasn't really increased. It's been pretty much flat. So I just don't know, and I know there is more expense on insurance and supplies and things like that. That's been a big increase. But other than that, I mean, relatively kind of flat. I mean, our gate attendance is down, and that's what, drives our negative numbers and things like that. But I think that's in direct portion with the amount of cost to get in.
There's a huge difference between paying the cost of a beer to get in and paying the cost of 10 beers to get in. And I don't know how, we're
Yeah.
certainly not children here, we're adults, and we understand that that's
So maybe
one
we
of the
work this
motivational factors. of
Like
people
I
attending.
work car deals sometimes backwards, Maybe we say, this is what we have, and this is what we need, what we can afford and what it can support, and this is what you've got to do to make it happen. Not, let's do this and hope that this happens.
Right.
Let's
We're all-
work it backwards.
We're all speaking in a vacuum. And the point is, for instance, I'd love to hear from Carl when he was signing acts. It's now going on September. And you're
You
talking.
said it in the email, it needs to start by October 1st.
The
need to start
process
to
that
combine
we
acts.
followed last year was typically ACT, because I worked very closely with Carl to actually do the contract negotiations. ACTs were typically contacted late September, early October. Through the winter, we did contract negotiations and finalized contracts. A lot of the key logistics happen in early January, February. A lot of
Right.
those things have
But
time of
you-
contracts, and that begins in end of September.
Here's the
Contacted
deal.
the acts in September
It
and
was-
October, which means when did you identify them to contact them?
That was something that Carl did with his
Right.
programming committee, so that's something that the city was not privy to those
But-
dates.
But as the mayor indicated, you know, it may be a manner of what level of acts you're attempting
Exactly.
to identify. In other words, you know.
I mean, what if all the blues acts were local people
10
and
at the
not
top,
headliners?
you know what I mean? Versus, you know,
Right.
I fully
We have to have a
understand.
mix of both.
You know any blues acts?
Oh, yeah.
See, my point is, again.
That's what we're struggling with.
My point is, again, that we need to figure out what we can afford and make, I mean, sponsor, you can't go off of what we got in sponsorships this year, because a lesser event is gonna have less sponsorships, okay? Or not as high of a volume, money-wise, sponsorship. So we've got to work it backwards. We've got to figure out what we can afford and then go after and make those things work in that realm, not the realm that we would like to see. I mean, because we're falling short of that. Let's not fall short of that, that's all. And I know it's work. I know it's a lot of work, and, I
We're
mean,
not
we've
shy
got.
from the work.
I
That's-
know that,
yeah.
but I'm not just talking about staff. I'm
Right.
talking about volunteers and all those other people
Yeah,
too.
right.
I mean, the volunteers have been phenomenal over 22
We
years.
couldn't do it without them.
So
Absolutely.
let's, let's make sure that we don't dishearten them, and they don't want to do it anymore, okay? We lost some key people. Let's, trudge through the mud and try to figure it out.
Whose responsibility was it in the past to get sponsors?
Person who resigned.
person who resigned.
Fundraiser.
That was his
Okay, I mean, there's
sole-
nobody out there that can step up to the
That was
plate and.
his sole responsibility?
They had 3 people resign, the 2 co-chairs and the fundraiser.
Fundraising chair.
And the
The
fundraising
city
chair.
helped in some capacity, but because we retain so much responsibility for other aspects of the event, there's a limited capacity of the events coordinator position to really go out and do the fundraising to the degree it needs to be completed.
And not just.
And to go fundraise, what you have to do, you're going out and asking businesses for $10,000 to $20,000, and they want to know what they're getting for it. And if the answer is, we don't know yet because we don't know, they're not going to write out, commit to $10,000 and $20,000.
And you're probably
sponsorships.
not gonna get 10 to 20,000. I mean, you're not gonna get that
People walk
kind
by
of
my
money.
office every day and ask for me to sponsor.
Sure.
Little
I've
League
called
team.
you all the time when I was at the Suns.
Yes. $100 here, $500 here.
Yeah, but these
$1,000.
sponsors have been $10,000.
We understand, Lou, but
And that's where
it's
the
not,
money.
it's not gonna be like it was.
I
We know
understand,
that.
Bob, I fully understand that. The question is, I think what everybody wants to know is, what is it going to be? And who's gonna be responsible for it? Just telling staff
think we need to-
to have the money available and do it, we need somebody who will come forward and do it. And if we have that person come forward, I'm 100% with you.
but if these are the options, in terms of your question of, what are we gonna have? Again, it's just, my opinion would be to recommend to staff to go back to the committee that remains, identify what level of commitment there is from the committee that remains, and evaluate what parts of, the last 10 events worth of information is working and not working, and say, okay, of what's working, what of that can we accomplish as a group, of what's not working, how do we sort of, trim away that fat in terms of, how we restructure the event, and then come back and say, okay, we either don't have a committee and we don't have the ability to make this work, or we do have a committee, we have the ability, and here's how we've looked.
And this is what we can produce.
Much similar,
Absolutely.
very similar
So-
to the panel that came in and said, look, we're not
Absolutely
doing the
correct.
same size country event, next year, we've trimmed off what we thought was the bad parts and focused on the good, and we're gonna restructure,
Couldn't agree with you
that
more,
event
President.
to do it.
I mean, face it, cost for city services is probably gonna go down, so. I mean, if we don't have as big an event, and, so.
And so we could use some of that funding for maybe some of the shortfall in the sponsorship. So that's what
We can
we
figure
can
it out.
certainly do,
Yeah.
yep.
All right, go to the
Do you have
committee
a
and find out
clear
what you can
picture of what?
find out.
Right, we'll take it back to the committee. I think it's a potentially a variation on option 2, if I'm hearing it
Oh, yeah,
correctly.
oh, without a
Is that-
doubt, yeah. Option 1 is no longer there at this point, anyway.
Right.
That's okay.
That there's something that will happen in 18. I do think it'll take some time to develop a committee into a 2019 larger festival.
Oh, I think so
So-
too, but I think you're probably gonna find people very receptive after the newspaper writes its
Yeah.
article tomorrow morning.
And concurrent with your efforts to go back to the committee and the remaining.
She left.
Committee, should be identification of potential lead entities that can take this on, like the Mr.
Yeah,
You
we'll
can't be the
reach-
only individual out
Joe
there.
Boyd, right.
Yeah, you
Somebody
gotta be able
like-
to go out and say, okay, these are 5 individuals or entities, you know, that
If
have
anybody
this
else knows of
capability.
anyone, yep.
You know, and here's what their cost is. Because I think that gives the committee a much better understanding then of sort of what pieces of the pie they need to sit down and evaluate whether or not they can actually handle.
Okay, very good.
So do you want staff to come back to you on what this then looks like?
I'd love for staff to come back in a month and say, here's,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
here's the result. We either can do it
Mid-September.
in this manner, or we can't. And, you
Right.
know, I'm perfectly happy to evaluate the exhausting
I'll send you some
of
comments.
option 2.
Okay,
Okay.
all right,
City
thank you.
Administrator's comments?
Just a reminder that this weekend is a wonderful event. The August-toberfest is Saturday and Sunday. I think gates open at 11.
Cake
both
tapping at
days.
2?
Keg tapping is at 2, I believe, Mr.
2
Mayor.
o'clock.
Saturday, yes. Saturday from 11 to 10, and I think Sunday from 11 to 5. That's all.
Cool. Don?
Mayor, no comments except to say that the loss of the Blues Fest is a disaster for this community.
Okay.
I agree. Lou? Set it on. Kristen?
I don't know that I have,
Let me
I had a
come back
bunch,
to you.
I had a bunch of comments, but I don't know right now.
You don't have anything, do you?
I don't.
All right. All right, we'll see everybody down at August-toberfest. Have a good week.
Thanks, Mayor.
Armor's